Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Initial information suggests that all of the 49 people on board a Russian plane that has crashed have died after the wreckage was found in flames in the country's far east. The Soviet-era plane was nearly 50 years old with children among those on board. The Kremlin says a meeting between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky is unlikely before the end of August. Deadly drone strikes have been reportedly launched from both Russia and Ukraine following the conclusion of peace talks in Istanbul yesterday. Israel says it is assessing a response from Hamas on the recent ceasefire proposal amid continued military action in Gaza. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has said that Gaza is facing a man-made mass starvation after a warning from over 100 aid agencies. Britain and India are set to sign a landmark free trade agreement during Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit, cutting tariffs on whiskey, cars and textiles while expanding market access. The deal, finalized in May after 3 years of talks, marks the UK's biggest post-Brexit trade agreement. China has urged Thailand and Cambodia to resolve differences through dialogue as French border clashes lead to at least 12 deaths. Both nations' militaries exchanged fire at the disputed border, which Thailand has completely closed amid rising tensions. EU member states have approved a $109 billion package of a counter-tariff on US goods, set to take effect from August 7 if ongoing trade talks with Washington collapse. According to media reports, the move marks one of the EU's strongest responses to US trade pressures. Chinese President Xi Jinping has met with top EU chiefs in Beijing, kicking off a summit set to be dominated by trade and the Russia-Ukraine war. China has sought closer ties with the EU amid global trade tensions over US tariffs. Columbia University has reached a deal worth over $220 million with the Trump administration. Following months of negotiation to restore federal funding, Columbia has been involved with a feud with Trump over alleged anti-Semitism on campus. European Union member states today have approved a €93 billion package of counter-tariffs on American goods. The measures would take effect on August 7th, but only if ongoing talks with Washington fail to reach a deal. The package includes €21 billion worth of earlier planned tariffs. The EU's tougher stance comes as both sides edge closer to an agreement, with a 15% baseline tariff on EU exports now under discussion, ahead of an August 1st deadline. Now we're joined by Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst joining us live from Taipei. Thank you, Ross, for joining us today. Very good to see you. Now, how seriously should we view the EU's €93 billion counter-tariff package? Is this a realistic negotiating tactic or a signal for a trade war with the US?
It appears that the Europeans are serious about implementing these measures if trade talks with the United States fail and the Trump administration imposes higher tariffs and other measures on goods from the European Union entering the United States. Certainly, the Trump administration will take this seriously. I think the Trump administration is aware of the harm to U.S. exporters that would occur if the European Union was to implement these measures. But at the same time, the Trump administration has its goals with regard to market access to Europe. It has its goals with regard to what kind of tariff it wants to impose on goods from Europe and entering the United States. And to really be fair to the Trump administration, some of their very tough measures have resulted in deals. And if those deals work out the way they're intended, such as the recently announced deal with Japan or Indonesia, these are very large deals with a lot of commitments for either exports from the United States to those countries or inbound investment. So again, from the Trump administration perspective, they're probably not going to be scared off. Certainly, again, if implemented, it would do some harm to U.S. exporters, but I don't think the Trump administration is going to be scared off, and I think they're going to take a hard line and hope that some agreement could be reached.
And now with the deadline set for August 7th, what are the chances that ongoing talks between the EU and the US can de-escalate tensions in time?
I think we should remain optimistic. The two sides are talking. Again, there's the recent examples of the U.S. reaching deals, especially a incredibly large and complex one like with Japan. So there's clearly a willingness from the Trump administration to reach deals. They're not saying we don't want to negotiate. They're not saying we don't want a deal. They're basically saying we're open for business, and let's negotiate. So I would say we should remain optimistic. We still have approximately 2 weeks, so there's still some time left, and hopefully the negotiators could reach a deal.
And now, how does this developing trade standoff align with other global economic risks, including US's domestic politics and growing protectionism worldwide?
To the extent that the United States is reaching deals with some of its major trading partners, I think markets are reacting positively to that. And in the countries that reach deals with the United States, again, such as Japan, the reaction so far has generally been positive. So if you're asking about the potential global reaction to a US-EU deal, I think there would be a positive reaction, of course, in the United States or in EU member countries. And I think the business communities and exporters in both the United States and the EU would welcome an agreement that would put aside the tensions. What the market or the global environment, of course, doesn't like is uncertainty. So an EU-US deal would certainly remove a lot of uncertainty. And another important thing to also keep in mind is if the US and the EU reach a deal, that would free up the resources of the US negotiators to then deal with other countries that have yet to reach a deal with the United States.
Thank you, Ross, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next news as well. Now, Ukraine and Russia traded air attacks along the Black Sea coast early today, just hours after their latest peace talks ended without progress in Istanbul. In Ukraine, Russian drones struck the port city of Odessa, injuring at least 4 people and damaging buildings in the historic center, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Meanwhile, in Russia, a woman was killed and another seriously injured after debris from a downed drone fell in the Adler district, just south of Sochi. Authorities also reported that a drone struck an oil depot in the nearby Sirius Federal District. Sochi airport operations were briefly suspended during this incident. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst. Thank you, Ross, for staying with us. Now, how do you assess the political and economic risks posed by continuing targeting of critical infrastructure from both sides?
The political issue here is that the two sides are not able to reach an agreement yet on a ceasefire, despite multiple rounds, including this week, of bilateral negotiations. Now, domestically, we've seen some protests over the anti-corruption measures recently introduced by the Ukrainian government, which the public did not like. So clearly, President Zelensky is under some domestic pressure. Of course, President Putin doesn't really worry about that because he basically arrests any domestic critics. So their domestic politics clearly differ between the two sides. Now, economically, it's clear that both sides are under pressure. Ukraine has to rely on foreign aid to support its economy. Russia is suffering from inflation. It's suffering from falling revenues as the price of oil falls, and the potential for significant U.S. sanctions on buyers of Russian energy, specifically India and China, which is something that the United States Congress and the President and President Trump have been looking at. So both countries still certainly face significant economic risks or worsening economic risks from the ongoing war. And that could be one of the reasons why they've agreed to multiple rounds of negotiations, even though the outcome of the negotiation meetings has been very limited.
And you have also touched down on this, but we are seeing a notable increase in continuation of this war, and also the talks are continuing. So what are the potential risks of these actions stalling peace negotiation even further?
The interesting thing there is both sides are under pressure from the United States to engage in ceasefire talks and to reach an agreement. Maybe Ukraine is not feeling the same amount of pressure from its European partners that it's getting from the Trump administration. But clearly there's pressure from the Trump administration on Ukraine, despite President Trump's recent agreement to sell weapons to the Europeans who could then gift them to Ukraine, or despite Trump's recent criticism of Putin as well. But also, again, Russia is facing this very new and significant risk that the United States is going to impose very hefty sanctions or tariffs on India and China for buying Russian energy. So Russia is under pressure, just like Ukraine is under pressure from the United States for some kind of progress in the ceasefire talks, even though it hasn't happened yet.
And now, what are the political dynamics within both countries, as well as their relations with external actors like NATO and the EU, as they continue their barrage of drones against each other and also talks at the same time?
Well, domestically in Ukraine, President Zelensky has this new issue with public dislike for some of the changes he's made to the legal infrastructure governing corruption investigations, and that's why there was public protests in recent days. And those were really the first public protests against Zelensky since the war began over 3 years ago. Zelensky's also facing pressure from manpower issues and the increasing need to draft ever younger men into the military. And that's a significant risk for Ukraine and for the domestic politics of Ukraine. In Russia, again, Putin doesn't really worry about criticism because he arrests his critics, but he does have this issue, a similar issue with regard to manpower. The losses that Russia has experienced on the battlefield, both in dead and injured, is extraordinary, and he needs to find ways to replace that manpower. So there is some domestic political pressure because of that Putin has to deal with, and that might be one incentive for Russia to reach an agreement in the ceasefire talks.
Do you think there can be another round of talks according to your assessment or maybe your predictions?
I think there will be. Again, both sides, both Ukraine and Russia, are under pressure from the United States, and I think that kind of pressure can have its effect. And there's been repeated willingness from Ukraine to engage in these talks, and it seems that they're open to doing it anytime, and regardless of the result or the lack of results in the previous round. Russia seems to have been very reluctant, but again, there's this new incentive for Russia to engage in these talks because of the 50-day deadline imposed by President Trump and this potential higher tariff on the two main customers for Russian energy, India and China. So both sides are incentivized to, and I would say that we should expect more rounds. And then there's this recent proposal from President Zelensky to have a four-way talk with the participation of Zelensky, President Erdogan of Turkey, as well as President Trump of the United States. We haven't really seen a formal response to that from the other three countries that he's proposed join these talks, but that's definitely something to watch in the coming days.
Yes, thank you very much, Ross Feingold, for joining us today and sharing your insight as a political analyst. Now we move on to our next news. Tensions have spiraled between Thailand and Cambodia, with deadly cross-border clashes erupting in the long-disputed Emerald Triangle. Thai F-16 jets struck Cambodian military positions after Cambodian artillery hit Thai soil, killing at least 12, including a child. Most died in a rocket strike on a petrol station in Sisaket province. Cambodia claims it acted in self-defense after Thai forces allegedly crossed the border. In retaliation, Thailand expelled Cambodian diplomats, shut all crossings, and condemned the attacks as brutal and inhumane. Meanwhile, China has expressed deep concern, urging peaceful dialogue. Cambodia has called for an emergency UN Security Council session, accusing Thailand of unprovoked military aggression. UNICEF has also appealed for restraint, stressing protection of civilians and children amid fears of a wider regional fallout. Meanwhile, China has expressed concerns over the ongoing conflict. Let's listen in to what Goh Jiakun, China's foreign ministry spokesperson, had to say.
我们对当前事态发展深感担忧，希望双方通过对话协商，妥善解决问题。从地区国家的共同利益和诉求出发，中方秉持公正、公勇立场，已经并将继续以自己的方式做劝和促谈的工作，为推动缓局降温发挥建设性作用。
Now we're joined by Peter Baum. He's a foreign editor of Weekly Blitz. You're joining us live from London. Thank you, Peter, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, China has called for peaceful dialogue between these two countries, reflecting its broader interest. How significant is China's role in mediating this dispute, and could their involvement hinder another or other political interest in these relations?
Yes, thank you for having me. This conflict has come, quite frankly, out of the blue. No one was expecting such a flare-up in such a short space of time. The latest we're hearing in terms of casualties is far more than the 12 or so reportedly killed. It could be as high as 50, but we'll wait for the news flow to come out. And China is obviously the main player in the region and has every interest in ensuring that this conflict does not widen and does not create more issues for the region, because China's economic issues are at the forefront of ensuring a stable Asian region, whether it's North Asia or Southeast Asia. So she will have a great role to play, and it will be really up to the two protagonists themselves to establish through the UN how far they want to continue with this conflict, or will they both rein in their military and come to some sort of dialogue. But it's quite interesting that this, over a disputed area of land, has never raged so much in the very recent months. So China is key in ensuring a peaceful dialogue.
And Peter, now both sides claimed self-defense here. What are the underlying causes of this long-standing conflict in this particular Emerald Triangle?
Yeah, isn't this crazy? As you quite rightly say, both sides, through press releases, are claiming that the others started it and one that they were just defending each other's territory. A bit of land, quite a large area, disputed by both parties, but in recent times both parties have managed politically to ensure that no military conflict flares up. Now all of a sudden this has happened. It's very difficult to analyse and to say for sure who started this conflict, who fired the first shots and why, and for what reason. It's just the amount of information emanating from both sides has been quite, what should we say, held back. They're not being forthcoming with the news, only to blame each other. And as I said previously, it's probable that more than 12 people, as currently being reported, have been killed in this conflict. And from what I understand, the vast majority being civilians.
Yes. Peter, please stay with us, and thank you for sharing that insight. We'll come back to you in a minute. Now we move on to our next news. India and the United Kingdom have signed a landmark free trade agreement, described as the most comprehensive trade pact since Brexit. Prime Ministers Narendra Modi and Keir Starmer formalized the deal at Chequers, signaling a new era in bilateral ties. Starmer hailed the deal as transformational, predicting a £4.8 billion annual boost to the UK's economy and £2.2 billion to British wages. The agreement slashes tariffs, benefits 99% of Indian exports, and makes it easier for UK firms to export whiskey, cars, and more. The deal is expected to raise UK exports to India by 60% and expand bilateral trade by nearly 39% in the long term. Starmer has emphasized job creation, deeper alliances, and Britain's openness to global business, while Modi has called it a step towards shared prosperity and stronger ties. Let's listen into what British Prime Minister Keir Starmer had to say.
Look, and we both know this is the biggest and most economically significant trade deal that the UK has made since leaving the EU. And I think I can say that it's one of the most comprehensive deals that India has ever done. So thank you, Prime Minister, for your leadership and for your pragmatism. And I'd like to thank everybody who's worked so hard to get this deal over the line.
Later in his tour, Modi is also set to meet King Charles before heading to Maldives for Independence Day celebrations. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Peter Baum. He's a foreign editor at Weekly Blitz. Thank you, Peter, for staying with us. Now, how significant is this trade deal for both UK and India?
Yes, for the UK, they really needed this deal and they need it to come off. Not everything has been finalised yet, but from the press releases we've had and from the comments we've had by Prime Minister Starmer, it looks as if it is going to happen, but it's not fully been ratified yet. Now, the UK really need this to happen, and I'll tell you why. The current economy in the United Kingdom is in dire straits. Inflation is high, unemployment is high, we have a huge immigration problem, our debt is high, and month by month, the amount of money we're needing just to repay debt alone is on an upward trajectory. So this economic trade deal between ourselves and India is an absolute necessity. We need it to happen. And it's no wonder that all the pomp and ceremony that Mr. Modi is going to experience is going to be brought out for him. Hopefully he'll address Parliament, he's going to meet the King and Queen, and it will be a significant win for the Starmer government if the deal gets finally ratified. However, make no mistake, there are some politicians and some political movements within the United Kingdom that are very opposed to this deal, and I hope this doesn't happen, but already there's talk of protests to confront Mr. Modi when he arrives in the United Kingdom. And those protests are coming from three factions, mainly the Pakistani British Muslim faction, the Indian opposition factions within the UK, and those, what should we say, far left supporters of the extremist Palestinian movement who see Mr. Modi as being an ally, which he is, and a pragmatic ally to the Israeli government.
Thank you very much, Peter Baum, for joining us and sharing your insight all the way from UK. Now we move on to our next news. Columbia University said today that it will pay over $200 million to the U.S. government in a settlement with President Donald Trump's administration to resolve federal probes and have most of its suspended federal funding restored. Trump has targeted several universities since returning to office in January over the pro-Palestinian student protests movement that roiled college campuses last year. In March, the Trump administration said it was penalizing Colombia over how it handled last year's protests by canceling $400 million in federal funding, citing an insufficient response to alleged anti-Semitism and harassment. Under the agreement, most federal grants terminated or paused will be reinstated, and Colombia's access to current and future grants will be restored. Trump has also used funding pressure on other universities and tried to deport foreign pro-Palestinian students, including at Columbia, but has faced court challenges. Now we're joined by my colleague Joshua Barnes. He's an anchor and correspondent at NewsX World. Joshua, thank you for joining. What more can you tell us about this evolving situation?
Well, yes, Suma, this is a very clear move from Colombia. It's all about federal funding for the university. Now, we know that Trump, over the past few months, has been looking at different universities and accusing them of allowing anti-Semitic behaviour on campuses, notably protests against the situation in Gaza. He's labelled those as pro-Palestinian protests, but also labelled them as anti-Semitic. Trump says that these universities need to do more in order to protect Jewish students who say they feel unsafe amidst these protests on, of course, an extremely divisive topic that often has people on either one extreme or the other. People either extremely in support of Palestine and wanting to speak out, or, of course, on the Israeli side. Now the situation is complicated, and you mentioned other universities like Harvard, which has been going through its own legal process. This all comes back to federal funding. The US government gives these colleges, universities in the United States an amount of money, a lot of funding that is through the government in order to promote several areas looking into education as well, foreign students, which is something which we've also seen sort of looked at by this Trump administration. But clearly here we're seeing Colombia acknowledging that this issue needs to be resolved. They've taken a hit. Over $220 million in total will be spent. That includes a proportion that will be given to people and students that have faced difficulties that are alleged to be anti-Semitism from the Trump administration. Of course, that allegation from the Trump administration, not these payments. Those are coming from Colombia. So it is a big moment. It is a big step. I think another win that Trump will see in his long-running battle. You mentioned legal cases, and of course that is still the case ongoing with Harvard and some other universities. But ultimately, federal funding will return to Colombia after this settlement.
Thank you very much, Joshua, for sharing that insight. Now we move on. Let's take a look at some stories from the world of Indo-Pacific. The United Nations has accused Taliban authorities of committing serious human rights abuses, including torture and arbitrary detention, against Afghans forcibly returned by Iran and Pakistan. So far in 2025, more than 1.9 million Afghans have been deported, mostly from Iran, amid large-scale campaigns. The UN highlighted that vulnerable groups such as women, formal government affiliates, media workers, and civil society members face heightened risks of reprisals. With up to 3 million expected, China praised a positive advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice, declaring that countries have a legal obligation to address climate change. The court described climate change as an urgent and existential threat and warned that failing to meet climate commitments could lead to reparations. While the advisory opinion is not legally binding, it holds significant political and legal influence. China has emphasized their ruling reflects the views of many developing nations and supports global climate cooperation. Indonesian authorities have arrested 2 foreigners accused of smuggling cocaine into the popular tourist island of Bali. A 25-year-old Brazilian man was caught with over 3 kilograms of cocaine hidden in his luggage after arriving from Dubai. On the same day, 32-year-old South African woman was arrested for carrying nearly 1 kilogram of cocaine concealed in her underwear, with both suspects reportedly expected payment for delivering the drugs. Indonesia has extremely strict drug laws, and convicted smugglers are sometimes executed by firing squad. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.